Everyone imagines pirates under blazing sun and rum-soaked sails, but some faced frozen seas that crushed their ships like paper. What did they do when escape meant either brilliance or death? You know what's funny about pirates? Most people think they spent their entire careers lounging around tropical beaches, sipping whatever passed for cocktails in the 1600s. Well, that's about as accurate as saying your grandfather only drives to the grocery store for fun. The truth is, many pirates were basically maritime entrepreneurs with questionable business ethics, and like any good entrepreneur, they followed the money wherever it led them. Sometimes that meant sailing straight into water so cold they'd make a polar bear complain about the heating bill. Take Captain William Kidd, for example. This guy didn't just stick to the warm, tourist-friendly Caribbean waters. Nope. He ventured north into regions where the weather could turn nastier than a tavern fight over the last piece of hardtack. Makes sense, right? Less competition meant more treasure for everyone still crazy enough to sail there. But here's the thing about chasing untapped riches in northern waters. The North Atlantic didn't care about your treasure hunting dreams. Temperatures could plummet faster than a dropped anchor, often dipping well below freezing without any warning. One day, you're sailing along, planning your next raid, and the next morning you wake up to find ice forming on your beard. Pirates quickly learned that dressing for success meant something entirely different in these waters. Forget the Hollywood image of shirtless buccaneers with flowing hair. These guys wore layer upon layer of stolen clothing, looking more like walking laundry piles than swashbuckling heroes. They grabbed coats, scarves, boots, and anything else they could pilfer to stay warm. The irony wasn't lost on them either. Here they were, tough sea criminals who could strike fear into merchant sailors' hearts, and they spent half their time shivering like wet cats. Yet they kept sailing north because the potential payoff was enormous. Northern expeditions promised something the crowded Caribbean couldn't deliver anymore. Surprise. Merchant ships in warmer waters expected pirates. They traveled in convoys, hired protection, and knew all the usual tricks. But up north, different story entirely. The weather wasn't just cold, it was unpredictably brutal. What started as a minor chill could become a life-threatening situation within hours. Smart pirates prepared for anything, but even the smartest ones sometimes found themselves facing something no amount of preparation could prevent. And when that happened, when the temperature dropped just enough and the wind died at exactly the wrong moment, these seasoned sea criminals discovered they had a much bigger problem than finding their next target. When ice starts forming around a pirate ship, it doesn't politely ask permission first. 1. Morning, you're sailing through chilly but manageable waters, and by afternoon, you're watching thick sheets of ice creep around your hull like nature's own prison bars. Makes sense that pirates weren't exactly thrilled about this turn of events, right? The thing about ice is that it's sneakier than a pickpocket at a crowded market. Ships would get caught during what sailors called sudden freezes, when temperatures dropped faster than a cannonball off the deck. Captain Samuel Bellamy's crew reportedly went from open water to complete entrapment in just 8 hours during one particularly brutal North Atlantic crossing in 1706. But here's where things get really interesting. Being stuck wasn't just inconvenient, it was downright terrifying. Ice doesn't just sit there looking pretty. It moves, shifts, and grows stronger every day. Wooden ship hulls, no matter how sturdy, were about as effective against crushing ice as a chocolate teapot in hell. Well, the smart captains knew this. They'd station crew members around the clock with long poles and axes, constantly chipping away at ice formations before they could build up enough pressure to crack the ship's sides. Think of it like dental hygiene, except instead of cavities, you're preventing your entire floating home from being crushed into matchsticks. Historical records from the 1700s show that some pirate ships remained trapped for months at a time. Months! That's longer than most people can stand their in-laws visiting. The crew of the notorious pirate vessel Frozen Fortune, yes, that was actually its name, spent 14 weeks locked in ice off the coast of Newfoundland. And the weird part is, many pirates discovered that being trapped wasn't an automatic death sentence. Sure, it meant their raiding operations came to a complete halt, but it also meant rival pirate crews couldn't attack them either. Some captains actually started viewing ice entrapment as an unexpected tactical advantage. Then, there's the whole issue of supplies. Pirates weren't exactly known for their meal planning skills under normal circumstances. When you're suddenly facing an indefinite stay in an icy wasteland, that barrel of hardtack and questionable rum starts looking pretty precious. The crews that survived these frozen imprisonments had to get creative fast. They couldn't just sit around complaining about the cold and waiting for spring to arrive. But what exactly did they do to stay alive when their floating home became an ice cube? That's where pirate ingenuity really started to shine. When your floating home becomes an ice cube, you can either panic or get creative. Pirates, being the resourceful bunch they were, chose creativity over crying. After all, they'd already chosen a career that required thinking outside the box, or in this case, outside the frozen ship. First order of business, those heavy cannons weren't just for intimidating merchant vessels anymore. Smart pirate crews quickly realized their artillery made excellent hunting equipment. Why struggle with a musket when you could blast a seal colony into next week's dinner? Sure, it was overkill, like using a sledgehammer to crack a walnut, but desperate times called for explosive measures. Then there's the sail situation. Those massive pieces of canvas that once caught Caribbean winds, perfect for makeshift shelters on shore. Pirates would drag these weatherproof sheets onto land and create surprisingly cozy lean-tos. Think of it as the world's first pop-up camping gear, just with more skull and crossbones decorations. But here's where things get interesting. The same skills that made pirates deadly on the high seas suddenly became survival superpowers. Carpentry knowledge meant they could build proper shelters instead of freezing under a flimsy sail. Seamanship experience helped them read weather patterns and predict when conditions might improve. The real enemy wasn't just cold, it was scurvy. That vitamin C deficiency could kill a crew faster than any naval battle. So pirates became amateur botanists, scrounging for anything remotely edible. Pine needles, certain bark, whatever Mother Nature offered in those frozen wastelands. Makes you appreciate your daily orange juice, right? Well, here's something most people don't know. Pirates often encountered indigenous peoples in these northern regions, and guess what? They actually traded peacefully more often than you'd expect. These local communities knew survival tricks that made the difference between life and death. How to find food under snow. Which plants prevented scurvy. Where to hunt during winter months. Some crews got so good at cold weather survival, they started planning for it. They'd steal extra blankets during raids. Raid ships carrying winter supplies specifically. The smart captains learned to pack their vessels like Arctic explorers rather than tropical raiders. And the weird part is, these survival skills made many pirate crews incredibly tight-knit. Nothing bonds people like nearly freezing to death together. Shared suffering created loyalty that warm weather piracy rarely achieved. But even the most creative solutions meant nothing if you couldn't stay warm. The battle against freezing temperatures required constant attention, and pirates developed some surprisingly ingenious methods to keep their bodies and spirits from turning to ice. When your ship turns into a floating iceberg, keeping warm becomes more important than finding treasure. Pirates stuck in ice had to master the art of fire making, or they become permanent popsicles faster than you could say, "Shiver me timbers." The first challenge? Finding fuel when you're surrounded by nothing but frozen water and disappointment. Smart pirates started by salvaging whatever wood they could find without turning their ship into kindling. Broken barrels, damaged planks, even old ropes soaked in tar. Everything became potential firepower. But here's where it gets interesting. Some crews got so desperate they actually started dismantling non-essential parts of their own vessel. Think about that for a second. These were men who'd rather freeze to death than give up their rum, yet they were willing to tear apart their only means of escape. Makes you wonder about their priorities, right? Pirates discovered that maintaining a fire on a wooden ship surrounded by ice required serious skill. Too big, and you'd burn down your floating home. Too small, and hypothermia would turn the crew into a bunch of very quiet sailors. The trick was creating controlled burn areas, often using metal buckets or repurposed cooking pots as makeshift braziers. Well, necessity really is the mother of invention. Some clever crews figured out how to use their ship's cannons as heating elements. They'd heat cannonballs in fires, then roll these giant iron hand warmers throughout the ship. Dangerous? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. But the real genius came in fire management schedules. Pirates organized themselves into fire watch rotations, treating warmth like the precious resource it was. One group would gather fuel, another would tend the flames, and a third would stand guard, because apparently even freezing pirates couldn't resist the urge to steal from each other. The psychological aspect was just as crucial as the physical warmth. Fire provided light during those endless polar nights, creating a gathering point where crews could share stories, sing songs, or complain about their captain's questionable navigation skills. These moments around the flames often meant the difference between maintaining morale and complete mutiny. And here's something that might surprise you. Pirates became surprisingly good at reading ice conditions by firelight. They'd study how flames reflected off the surrounding ice, learning to predict weather changes and potential breakup patterns. Fire wasn't just keeping them alive, it was teaching them how to escape. The most successful crews treated fire making like a military operation, with backup plans for their backup plans. Because when you're trapped in ice, running out of heat isn't just inconvenient, but staying warm was only half the battle. They still had to eat. When your ship's trapped in ice and your hardtack's gone moldy, dinner doesn't exactly come with a menu. Pirates stuck in frozen waters had to get creative fast, and I mean really creative, like using their cannons to hunt seals creatively. Most crews carried enough supplies for maybe 3 weeks at sea, but ice didn't care about their meal planning. Ships could stay trapped for months, turning breakfast into a daily treasure hunt that made finding actual treasure look easy. The smart pirates hit the ice with fishing lines before you could say, "Shiver me timbers." They'd cut holes through frozen surfaces, drop their lines, and pray something a bit. Ice fishing became as essential as knowing which end of a cutlass to hold. Some crews got so good at it they could pull up enough fish to feed 20 hungry pirates, though the fish were about as appetizing as eating your own boot. Then there's the seal hunting. Now, seals might look cute and harmless, but try explaining that to a starving pirate crew. These maritime bandits would spot a seal colony and suddenly become the world's most motivated hunters. They'd use muskets, harpoons, and sometimes even small cannons to bag their dinner. One seal could feed a crew for days, assuming they could stomach the taste, which, let's be honest, tasted like fishy leather. But here's where things get interesting. Land foraging separated the survivors from the sailors who'd become permanent ice sculptures. Pirates would venture onto frozen shores looking for anything edible. Berries, roots, even tree bark in desperate times. Makes your worst camping trip look like a 5-star restaurant experience, right? The really desperate crews started eyeing the local wildlife with predatory intent. Arctic foxes, rabbits, even the occasional caribou if they wandered too close. Pirates set traps using rope from their rigging and bait from their dwindling supplies. Imagine explaining to your captain that you used the last of the rum as trap bait. Well, some crews got lucky and encountered indigenous peoples who knew the land better than pirates knew their own ships. Trading became crucial. A few pieces of eight for survival knowledge that no treasure map could provide. These interactions often meant the difference between making it to spring or becoming part of the ice forever. Food wasn't just about filling bellies anymore, it was about staying alive long enough to see warm waters again. Every meal became a small victory against the cold that wanted to claim another pirate crew. Speaking of victories against the elements, keeping their ships from falling apart required just as much ingenuity as finding food. When your wooden ship is trapped in freezing temperatures for weeks, things start breaking down faster than a cheap umbrella in a hurricane. Pirates quickly discovered that ice wasn't just their enemy on the outside, it was wreaking havoc on every piece of their vessel. The cold made wood contract and expand like an accordion player having a seizure. Joints that had been perfectly sealed suddenly developed gaps you could stick your finger through. Worse yet, the constant pressure from shifting ice could crack the hull faster than a bad joke kills a conversation. Smart pirates always kept their carpenters busier than a one-legged cat in a sandbox during these frozen ordeals. These skilled crew members became more valuable than the ship's treasure chest. Without them, a small crack could turn into a gaping hole, sending everyone to a very cold, very permanent swim. But here's where things got tricky. Working with tools in sub-zero temperatures was like trying to thread a needle while wearing boxing gloves. Metal tools became so brittle they'd snap under pressure. Hammers felt like blocks of ice, and trying to grip anything with frozen fingers was nearly impossible. Pirates had to get creative with their repair materials too. When you're stuck in the middle of nowhere, you can't exactly run to the local hardware store. They'd salvage wood from damaged parts of the ship, melt down metal fittings, and reuse every scrap of tar and pitch they could find. The most challenging repairs involved the hull itself. Imagine trying to patch a hole in your boat's bottom while it's surrounded by crushing ice. Pirates would sometimes have to chip away ice just to reach the damaged areas, then work quickly before new ice formed. It was like performing surgery while someone kept turning off the lights. What made these situations even more desperate was that pirates couldn't afford to wait for perfect conditions. A small leak in freezing water meant death, plain and simple. So they'd work in shifts, rotating crew members in and out of repair duty to prevent frostbite. Some crews got so good at these emergency repairs that they developed techniques still used by cold-weather sailors today. They'd create makeshift workshops below deck, pre-cut repair materials, and even fashion specialized cold-weather tools. The irony wasn't lost on these sea rogues. They'd spent their careers taking apart other people's ships, and now their survival depended entirely on putting their own back together. But even the most skilled repair crews knew that fixing a ship was only half the battle when you're trapped in ice. Being trapped in ice for months wasn't exactly a vacation cruise. Pirates had to create order out of chaos, and that meant establishing routines stricter than a boarding school headmaster's schedule. Most captains divided their crews into shifts that rotated every few hours. Some men tended the fires, a job more crucial than guarding treasure since freezing to death made spending gold rather difficult. Others took watch duty, scanning for polar bears, rival ships, or the first blessed signs of spring thaw. The daily grind became surprisingly mundane for men used to swashbuckling adventure. Pirates spent hours scraping ice off rigging, checking hull integrity, and maintaining their weapons. Cutlasses needed constant attention in freezing temperatures. Metal became brittle as an old man's patience, and a broken sword in pirate territory was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. But here's where things got interesting. Leadership during these frozen months separated legendary captains from forgettable ones. A smart captain knew that bored, cold, hungry pirates were more dangerous than any naval fleet. Mutiny sprouted faster than weeds in fertile soil when men had nothing but time to plot and grumble. Successful captains became part drill sergeant, part entertainment director. They organized competitions, who could tie knots fastest with frozen fingers, storytelling contests, even gambling tournaments using buttons or carved pieces instead of coins. Anything to keep minds occupied and hands busy. Food rationing required the diplomatic skills of a seasoned politician. Pirates weren't exactly known for their patience or sharing abilities under normal circumstances. Now try explaining to a 200-pound buccaneer why his daily portion looked smaller than a church mouse's dinner. Captains had to balance fairness with practicality while keeping everyone alive until spring. The smart crews used winter as boot camp season. They practiced sword fighting, improved their sailing knots, and shared navigation knowledge. Some pirates carved scrimshaw or repaired clothing, skills that proved valuable when regular civilization was months away. Sleep schedules became crucial too. Long Arctic nights could drive men mad if not managed properly. Crews learned to maximize daylight hours for active work and save evening time for quieter activities. Card games by firelight became as important as any battle strategy. Then there's the psychological warfare aspect that most people never consider. Keeping hope alive when surrounded by endless white required mental toughness that would impress modern survival experts. Well, all this waiting and routine building was just preparation for the main event. Because when spring finally arrived and ice began cracking, these disciplined crews faced their biggest challenge yet: getting out alive. When spring finally arrived, it was like watching a prison break in slow motion. The ice that had held these pirates captive for months began to crack and groan like an old man getting out of bed. But here's the thing about escaping frozen waters. It wasn't as simple as just sailing away into the sunset. Smart pirate crews had spent their winter months doing more than just surviving. They'd been planning their great escape like it was the heist of the century. Ropes were checked and double-checked. Sails were mended and ready to catch the first decent wind. The ship's hull had been inspected more times than a teenager's face in a mirror. But Mother Nature had her own sense of humor about timing. Ice doesn't just politely disappear overnight. It breaks apart in chunks, creating floating obstacles that could punch holes in a ship faster than you could say, Davy Jones. Many crews found themselves playing the world's most dangerous game of bumper cars, trying to navigate between ice floes that weighed more than their entire vessel. The lucky pirates, who had maintained good relationships with local indigenous peoples, often got insider tips about ice patterns. These weren't your typical weather forecasts. They were survival guides passed down through generations of people who actually knew how to read frozen water. Then there's the issue of supplies. After months of rationing, most crews were running on fumes and whatever questionable meat they'd managed to hunt. Some ships limped away from their icy prisons looking more like floating skeletons than fearsome pirate vessels. Well, successful escapes called for celebrations that would make New Year's Eve look tame. Pirates who made it out alive often threw parties that lasted for days. Rum flowed like water, assuming they had any left after their winter ordeal. But the real treasure these pirates discovered wasn't gold or silver. It was knowledge. Crews who survived ice entrapment became legendary for their seamanship skills. They learned to read weather patterns better than any landlubber meteorologist. They understood ice behavior in ways that would make modern Arctic explorers jealous. Makes sense, right? Nothing teaches you about survival quite like almost not surviving. These experiences changed how pirates approached northern expeditions entirely. Word spread through taverns and ports about the best times to sail north and when to head back south. The smart captains started treating ice like just another enemy to outsmart rather than a death sentence to fear.